Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. I'm your instructor, Victor Fabiana Bundesguerra. This is Philosophy 110, Introduction to Philosophy. And today we're talking about Mesoamerican philosophy, which is, I think, pretty exciting. It's going to be pretty not Eurocentric. Cool. It's going to be a good amount of slides and a good amount of content we're going to be going over. We're not going to finish it today. But as we're going to see, I think this is a good topic to sort of end our unit of epistemology on, because it does start getting kind of metaphysical, and metaphysics is our next unit. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So we'll talk about what Latin American philosophy even is, and we'll see how its relationship briefly with Mesoamerican philosophy. Give me 1 second. There you go. My computer wasn't reacting. We'll look at the pillars of Mesoamerican philosophy. I have identified 5 main pillars, or what I believe to be 5 main pillars, and we're going to go ahead and go over them. And again, my Nahuatl is not perfect, the pronunciation, so if I butcher the Nahuatl, the language, I apologize. I apologize 100%. In particular, we're going to be focusing on Mexica or Nahua philosophy. The Mexica people are what we as Westerners would call Aztecs. Of course, they themselves did not call themselves that. So, according to the Nahua people, one of their pillars was Nautilistli, or truth. That is their sort of epistemological concept of knowledge. And the way they're going to understand it is as well-rootedness. We're also going to look at what they believe regarding lifeways, slipperiness and existentialism, the 5 ages, as well as becoming a person. And finally, at the end, again, not today, but in our next core lecture, we'll look at the dialogue of flower and song, which is one of your assigned readings for this week, as well as the Maffei piece. I'm not sure if the Maffei one is required. I might have marked it as optional, but definitely I do recommend you read it. It's very, very good. So what is Latin American philosophy? Let me go ahead and move my head. So most of the citations I'm coming from are going to be from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy and the entry by James Maffei themselves. James Maffei is a professor who studied this over at the University of Maryland, I believe. But they're going to be mostly, besides that, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they're going to be coming from this volume, Latin American and Latinx Philosophy, that I have here in the bottom right. And it's edited by Robert Sanchez, who's depicted up above. And they're located here. They're a philosopher here in Southern California. So that volume begins with the question: was Levinas, a European philosopher, correct when declaring that the Greeks in the Bible are all that is serious and humanity, everything else is dancing? Basically implying, do African people, Asian people, Native Americans, Mesoamericans, do they not have philosophy? And the question, of course, or the answer, of course, is going to be, yes, they did have philosophy, and Levinas is wrong. But often we don't hear about that, right? So according to Robert Sanchez, Latin American philosophy goes beyond the geography or a certain time period. It's not defined solely by that, but it is a proper philosophical tradition that is defined by 4 themes, namely epistemic injustice towards certain thinkers. We know what epistemic injustice is. Emphasis on lived and historical experience. It is practical and engaged, and it's also metaphilosophical. It asks us to step back and really examine and interrogate what we even believe philosophy sort of is. Now, if you're very interested in this or these type of ideas, I encourage you to sign up for the Latin American philosophy course, which Grossman College does offer. So Mesoamerican philosophy originates from philosophy or thought before the Spanish colonization. And the Mexica called their thinkers, what we would call philosophers, the Tlamatinime. That's the plural version, but they also called them Tlamatini for singular. And they were their philosophers, their wise ones, or their sages. The question that we should sort of be asking, right, is to what extent, if any, have indigenous philosophers influenced the rest of philosophy and Latin American philosophy? Again, there's a question that we would examine more in the Latin American philosophy class, but it's good to sort of have in the back of your head as well. Some quick terminology. I think I've already covered this, but the Aztecs are the Mexica. They spoke Nahuatl, the language. And the Mexica plus their surrounding folk who also spoke Nahuatl, they're known as the Nahua people or the Nahua culture, which are not exactly the same, but they share a lot of similarities, so it makes sense to talk about the Nahua culture or the Nahua philosophy. But of course, we're going to be mostly talking about the Mexica proper, since we have the most documents, or the most translated documents in English for us in this class. With that said, the Mexica, they're the people that were in present day Mexico City before the colonization. So that area, the area of the former city of Tenochtitlan. Keep that in mind. Again, I'm going to be getting my citations from there. But with that said, let's go ahead and get into the first pillar, right? Nautilizli, which again roughly translates to truth. So now in Western philosophy, when we think about truth or knowledge, we usually think of it in terms of correspondence, meaning that something I say, a statement, is true, it's knowledge, just in case it hooks up to reality in the right way, external reality, just in case it corresponds to reality in the right way. So if I say the table is red, that's true if it corresponds, the statement, to an external object, a table, that just so happens to be the color we recognize as red. Now, for the Mexica people, truth was not really about correspondence. Truth, as we're going to see, is a lot more practical. Truth, or knowledge, to know something, to have nautilizli, is to have well-grounded stability, or well-foundedness, or, and they use this metaphor a lot, well-rootedness. That is, you have knowledge if you're able to navigate the world well. Think of it like this. This is something that maybe might be a little more approachable to start sort of grasping the way they viewed knowledge. Suppose you're a physics major and you really know they're the smartest physics major. You know a lot about physics. You're a great physicist. You know, particularly all about wheels and bikes. However, you don't know how to ride a bicycle. When you get on the bike, despite all your knowledge and all your physics, you fall off the bike. The question is, do you know how to ride a bike if you know everything physical about it, all the physical properties in the world? Well, it depends, right? How we're defining knowledge. In Western philosophy, we might say, yeah, you do know a lot about bikes. You do know how to ride a bike because you know all the physics regarding it. But for the Mexica philosophers, we would say, no, because you're not stable on the bike. You don't actually know how to navigate on it. Now, some other more terminology that we should learn here, right? Teotl is roughly translated as spirit or energy. Sometimes, because of the colonization, right? And these documents were translated multiple times, often by Franciscan Christian thinkers. Sometimes it gets translated as God, but really that's kind of misleading. Teotl is this force that animates the whole universe, both living and non-living things. It is animistic. It exists in everything. So at the heart, Maffei tells us, of Mexica philosophy stands the thesis that there exists a single dynamic, vivifying, eternally self-generating and self-regenerating sacred power, energy, or force, Teotl. The cosmos, and we're going to get a little weird, we're going to get very poetic, very metaphorical later, we're going to see, but the cosmos, right, all of reality, is Teotl's Nahual, disguise or mask. The Nahuatl word Nahual derives from Nahuali, signifying form-changing shaman, suggesting its sort of indigenous shamanic roots. So it's weird, right? Basically, the idea is that there's this force, and this force is reality, and it permeates everything, living and non-living. But we here in the world, we often can't correctly grasp and understand Teotl because we are living in its sort of disguise. Think of here now of the metaphor of the tree. You yourself might be a flower or a leaf or a single branch on that tree, and you look at separate branches and separate leaves or separate flowers on the tree, and you look at them as separate from you, separate from the whole. But only when you stop and sort of think deeply, according to Mexica philosophy, do you realize that you're all parts of this animating force, that you all have the same root. Hence the metaphor of rootedness, hence the metaphor of the tree. You're all actually one being, whether you realize it or not. So nautilizli, more specifically, is truth, and it means well-rooted, but more specifically, even according to the Mexica, it means being well-rooted in Teotl, in this animating universal cosmological force. And when you're well-rooted in Teotl, you are able to understand Teotl. It, in a sense, reveals itself to you. It discloses itself to you because again, it's animated, it has a bit of its own will. And because it presents itself to you, you're able to correctly understand not only how to live in an engaged, practical way, but you understand how everything sort of comes together. There's going to be a lot more important later on when we start getting to the ideas of balance. So again, the Nahua saw everything earthly as Theotos Nahua. The Nahua philosophers claim that everything earthly is dreamlike. Now, it's kind of interesting, right? When Descartes thought that we might be living a dream, he took that very seriously as a threat. Reality should not be dreamy, and that poses a serious threat to us. But the Nahua go in the very opposite direction. Reality is dreamy and should be dreamy because Teotl makes it that way. It makes it appear as though everything is separate. And it's okay to be dreamy and appreciate separate individual things and their personalized individual identity, so long as, at the end, we cognize correctly and realize that we're part of the same animating force. And again, you have to engage practically. So here we have some poems, right? We only rise from sleep. We come only to dream. It is untrue, unrooted, that we come on earth to live. Nezahualcoyotl, the philosopher and ruler, he is in a sense, kind of a philosopher king. He sung, "Is it Nelly, rooted, true, authentic, that one really lives on the earth, not forever on earth, only a little while here? Though it be jade, it falls apart. Though it be gold, it wears away. Though it be quilts of plumage, it's torn asunder. Not forever on this earth, only a little while here." Both of these poems are from the Cantares Mexicanos. Keep that in mind. You can look those up on your own time. They should be freely available, at least in Spanish, and the original Nahuatl. So that's sort of the first pillar, right? Knowledge is very much about practicality. Do you know how to actually live? And do you know how to actually live while realizing that we're part of this same animating force that goes through all of us? And again, by all of us, I mean living and non-living things. Now, here comes sort of the second part to that, of being engaged and knowing how to live, the idea of nemilistli, or life ways. And here we're getting a lot more from James Maffei, right? So the philosophers pursue what scholars call a way or path seeking. That is their philosophy. This is fundamentally different from what we philosophers in the West will call truth seeking, where we're trying to gain and attain knowledge. That's not really what philosophy was to the Mexica people. It was very much finding the path, figuring out the way. Like most, if not all, indigenous peoples in the New World, the Mexicans see philosophy and what we call religion or spirituality together with their entire lifeway as a single seamless endeavor, so that they didn't really differentiate between religion and philosophy. To them, it was all part of the same project, namely living well in this world. So, where is this? Oh, okay, so here's a bit of a story, right? There's this document, right, coming from the conquest, colonization, called the Colloquios in Doctrina Cristiana. It was co-authored in 1564 by these missionaries, these Franciscan missionaries, right? And in it, they attempted to engage the Mexica in dialogue with the aims of basically converting them and making them believe in biblical truth. And you can read this document. I'm not sure if it's in English, but if it's in Spanish, you can read it. And maybe you can get a translation of it. But you don't have to read it. I'm going to go ahead and sum it up for you. In that, right, the Franciscans basically preached to them a few things. They preached about God, a universal, single, immutable God that is perfect. They preached about truth, a single, objective, complete truth, namely biblical truth that is universal for all people everywhere. They talked about belief, having the right belief. You need to have the right belief. Hopefully, by having the right belief, you then have the right actions, but belief comes first. And they also talk about evil, the very Manichaean idea of evil versus good, and how eventually good will triumph over evil. And when a good triumphs over evil, that saves you. That is salvation. It is salvific. So that's kind of what they preached, right? And here's kind of their response, the Mexica people. We have their response. He says, "But we, whatever will we say to you now? Even though we are lords, shall we destroy the ancient lifeway? Those which our grandfathers, our grandmothers passed down to us, considered great. It is said that their words are wise, and that they attend their duties by night by day. our ancestors and our creator beings still help us today. Now, the idea of creator beings being gods, as we're going to see, is not the greatest word for them. But when you mention they attend to us, they mean their ancestor as well as the creator beings, which again, for us Westerners, the closest thing will be gods. These words that you say, colonizers, right? Spanish people, are new. Thus, we are astonished. For our ancestors who came to live on the earth, they did not go speaking in this way. They give us their life way. They steadfastly follow, they serve, they venerate the creator beings. And perhaps we will now go and destroy the ancient life way, the Chichimec life way, the Toltec life way, the Colwa life way. What about the Tepanec life way? Should we destroy their way of being, their life way? We cannot be satisfied, and we do not yet go along. We do not yet make acceptable for ourselves what you say. So for them, as we can see from this pretty detailed response, right, life ways are understood as one being handed down. They speak of handed down by their ancestors, not by a god or gods. And they speak of the authenticity, genuineness, and practicability of their life way. Being practical in their life way, that's what makes them true. Their talk of actual belief and creed is pretty absent. They speak not of what they believe and not of something objective, or not of some objective truth of what they believe. Again, to them, knowledge is roadmaps for a living. Then they also talk about well-rootedness, authenticity, genuineness, and practicability of their path does not equal metaphysical truth or metaphysical correspondence with reality. Rather, their path is well-rooted in their own history, their ancestors' saying, their judgments, migrations, and their ways of living. Now, the plurality of alternative pathways, there's multiple pathways. That doesn't mean they're, cultural relativists, right? They, as we're going to see later on, they do think that certain ways of living are wrong, but still there's more than one correct way to live. There's the Mexica life way, the Chichimec life way, so on and so on. There's no single correct life way, but you can, as we're going to see, get unbalanced and fall off of a life way. All of reality is sacred, so there's no mention of sin or salvation. As we're going to see with their philosophy is wholly this worldly. There's no sort of afterlife that you can sort of hope for. So, and that makes sense, right? If there's no afterlife that you can sort of hope for, you sort of return to Teotl, then your philosophy is going to be totally directed at living well right now in this life. And finally, something that they don't mention too much right here, but their philosophy is topian, meaning it's rooted to a specific geography, namely Anahuac, the Valley of Mexico. And they do believe that one is able to live a proper Mexica life only there, only in Anahuac, which is, pretty intense, right? So at this point, I think now that I've given you a little bit about truth and a little bit about life ways and how they think about knowledge, let's go ahead and pause here for today, and we'll go ahead and finish the 3 other pillars, as well as talk a little bit about the poem next time. Well, that's it, folks. Good job. Keep up the good work, and I'll see you next time.